Hello everyone, I'm Ian. I am an accessibility specialist and amongst other things I also help to organise GAconf. Each edition of the event always starts with a news update, a look at some examples of the progress that we've seen in the 6 months since the previous edition back in October. Every time I do one of these, I start out wondering if there'll be enough to fill the space, but once you look at the whole 6 months together, there's always a ton. So even though I'm just giving some highlights, it's still going to be quite a big info dump. Don't feel like you need to keep any notes or look things up though, because at the end, I will give you a document that has links to everything that I am mentioning today. I've grouped it into 6 topics: assistive tech, resources for players, resources for devs, events, games, and people. So first up, assistive tech. Innovations in hardware and software that sit outside of the games themselves. We're starting off with a farewell. Warfighter Engaged has closed their doors after 14 years. Their work in assistive tech and occupational therapy leaves a huge legacy, from the thousands of people that they've directly helped through to being the primary collaborator on the creation of the Xbox Adaptive Controller. And their former staff, Caitlin Jones and Eric Johnson, are of course still blazing the trail at Xbox and in the occupational therapy field, respectively. There have been some new things too, like the launch of the Glider, which is an input device that maps foot movements to mouse and keyboard controls. BioWave released the award-winning Proteus Builder, which is a simplified single-stick version of their modular Proteus controller that can be housed in a desk-mounted shell for use either on its own or paired with another device like a mouse. And not content with that alone, they've also pushed out their Akimbo firmware update, allowing components to be split across 2 controller setups running as a single input device through the same dongle. Logitech designed and published files to 3D print adaptive attachments to make their lightweight Pebble mouse more accessible for a range of different needs. And there have been some upgrades over in console land too, with the PlayStation Portal adding adjustable text size and a screen reader, and the Switch 2 adding Japanese predictive text narration, upgrading its screen reader to support 400% speed, and expanding that screen reader to cover first boot, together with a support guide to walk blind customers through setting up their console for the first time. It's always great to hear about progress from Nintendo, and I think in this presentation they are mentioned more often than they ever have been before. So on that note, next up we have resources, starting with resources for players and continuing with the Nintendo theme. The Kirby Air Riders Nintendo Direct stream had a whole segment dedicated specifically to accessibility. Showcasing accessibility in this way is a first for Nintendo and still a really rare occurrence across the whole industry. Keeper also got in on the video announcement game for the addition of their configurable gameplay high contrast settings, with the announcement itself having the high contrast modes applied to Lee Petty, the chap who's making the announcement. So here he is in rather fetching green with a nice thick white outline applied. It's easy to forget when you are neck deep in the day-to-day grind that what we're all ultimately working towards is bringing more joy to more people. And I thought the fun way this announcement was handled was a nice reminder of that. There was the relaunch of Cameron Ackett's BSLGG, a community-built British Sign Language glossary of gaming terms, created by deaf game developers and gamers alike. In response to hearing that gamers had trouble finding content creators who either streamed in an accessible way or streamed about accessibility, Able to Play have launched their Discover Creators function, letting you browse creators based on a whole bunch of accessibility tags. And on the topic of tags, Steam updated theirs. They still have a way to go. The differences between Steam's and AGI's are still causing some real headaches, but the refinements they made in this iteration are a good step forward, clearing up some common ambiguities. And Steam have done something else too. When you request a refund, you are given a drop down to choose why. And they've now added an option labelled It's Missing Accessibility Features I Need. Players don't always select these accurately, of course, but even if caveated, I think devs being able to have access to a data point like this is pretty cool. Next up, we're still on resources, this time for developers, and over the past 6 months there has been nothing short of a deluge. So to kick it off, first up, Can I Play That launched Community Voices, an editorial series of feature interviews from prominent people in the community sharing their lived experience. Fontic, which is EA's free text accessibility evaluation tool, had a nice upgrade that lets the existing automated contrast checks be performed under color blindness simulation. That actually arrived as part of another expansion to EA's patent pledge, making a bunch more of their patents free for everyone else to use, covering things like methods of generating synthesized speech. The Accessible Games Initiative too have been busy putting out documentation. Firstly, implementation guides for people wanting to integrate the accessibility tags into their own storefronts. And secondly, web-based developer documentation to help teams understand the criteria behind when and why tags do or don't apply to games. Xbox were, of course, the first company to get the AGI tags up on their storefront, and they have been showing some data on them. So, if a game has enough tags, it's displayed on a dedicated page on the Xbox Store reserved for games that have the most tags. And when players look at a game through that page, 10% of them then buy the game, which is multiples higher than what you normally see from digital storefronts. And if you like data like that, I put together a little collection covering not just general business case data like that, but also lots of specific feature usage data from games too. And some important caveats and cautions about what you can and can't conclude from data, and the circumstances around why people even ask for it in the first place. And again, there'll be a link to that resource alongside links to everything else in the talk given to you in the document at the end. Elsewhere, the American Council of the Blind published their draft guidance for gaming audio description. Audio description meaning an optional recorded audio track that narrates what's happening visually. The document is open for public comment, so please go and hit them up. Closer to home, Abertay University in Scotland, in collaboration with the RNIB, produced a detailed report on accessibility of XR games, including some proposed guidelines. And the RNIB themselves updated their own public guidelines on making mainstream games accessible to blind players. An enormous resource was published by Inclusive Game Lab, which is part of the TH Köln University in Germany. It's a set of open educational resources on game accessibility, aimed primarily at educators in Germany to build accessibility content into their game dev degrees from, but it also has some of the content available in English aimed at the international game development community. Next, from We In Games in Finland, and from Leisha Pren specifically, who I'm sure many of you know, we have a set of guidelines for making studio office environments accessible to disabled staff. And also out of Finland, a document with a stack of guidance for organisers of esports events on how to make those events accessible to disabled competitors and disabled audiences. Which brings me neatly on to events themselves. Firstly, still on that same topic, there was a whole conference on esports accessibility, the Adaptive Esports Summit in South Korea. There's a few familiar faces in there: Jordan, Tulai, Bryce. I swear Bryce Johnson's beard gets even more epic every time I see a photo of him. And an esports adjacent event, Games Done Quick's Disability and Neurodivergent Special, acting both as a fundraiser for the Autistic Women Non-Binary Network and as a highly accessible event showcasing how it can be done. It was really spectacular work by Jada and Madeline, ranging from no restrictions on input devices to participants able to take part from home, all the way through to a commentary buddy system for participants who are less able to or less comfortable with communicating verbally. And spoiler time, they will be giving a talk about it at the GAconf USA event later this year. Seattle Indies ran an in-person Games for Blind Gamers event back in January with a bunch of game developers, accessibility professionals, and members of the blind and low vision community coming together for demos and talks, with a push out to the fifth edition of the Games for Blind Gamers hackathon. University College London hosted a game accessibility mini conference, the Game Accessibility Day, back in November. It was held under the banner of GAIN, the Game Accessibility Innovation Network, which is an initiative to build links between academia and industry. And then came the sequel, the Game Accessibility Symposium, held in partnership with RNIB. This was a larger 3-day long event encompassing talks, panels, and a game jam. And it's hot off the press. It actually was running from Wednesday to Friday just last week. There's been a whole bunch of progress on a different type of event too: award ceremonies. BAFTA have taken a step forwards with their 26 awards just a week ago, now including accessibility specialists on the panels for individual categories, to make sure that accessibility is a factor that is taken into account when deciding the winners of things like technical excellence. And some have taken it further still. The Canadian Game Awards just announced their new Innovation in Accessibility category. The PlayStation Partner Awards Japan Asia did the same, the first regional industry accessibility awards in Asia, I believe. They only have 5 categories in those awards, and one of them is now accessibility. And it didn't stop there. The Algeria Game Awards, the Game Audio Network Guild Awards, the Roblox Creator Awards, and the American Council of the Blind's Audio Description Awards Gala all added new categories for game accessibility in this winter's awards season. That means there are now over 30 different award ceremonies celebrating people and companies that are pushing the bar for game accessibility. And they're diversified too. There's lots of regional ones for specific countries like France, Spain, the UK, New Zealand. Specific platforms for mobile, for Playdate. Multiple different awards for accessibility in indie games, for games made by students, for most accessible horror games. Which is awesome. Every bit more diversification like that means the stellar work of even more contributors to the field gets to be called out and recognised and celebrated. But it's increasingly hard to keep track of, though. So wouldn't it be nice if somebody was to make a handy spreadsheet of every award ceremony together with the relevant dates, whether they take submissions, whether there's an entry fee, who the past winners were? Well, here you go. Some kind soul has done it for you. The info I made it from is from 2025, but I am trying to keep it up to date as time goes on. Awards can be hugely powerful things, not just from a personal recognition side, but for things like team motivation and even ammo for internal politicking too. And the only way to guarantee you won't win is to not enter. So please, please make use of the info in this sheet. That winners column of that sheet was obviously packed full of awesome games doing awesome things. So this next section here is where I get to go into a bit more detail on that and list just a few of the great releases from the past 6 months. This is where it does get a bit intense. It's going to be a really quick barrage of loads of names. But again, they'll all be included in the document at the end, which also has links to exactly what each one has done, and also lists a whole bunch of other games that I don't have time to mention in the talk today. So please check them out. There's a great wealth of examples to learn from and be inspired by. And also, they're all great contacts to drop a line to as well. Starting with AAA, so games with bigger teams, bigger budgets. There's been quite a big uptick here in the past 6 months with good efforts from games like Battlefield 6, Black Ops 7, Ghost of Yotai, Resident Evil Requiem, Anno 117, Keeper, Ninja Gaiden 4, Pragmata, Code Vein 2. Milestone actually hitting twice with Ride 6 and particularly Screamer, with a whole bunch of things from game speed to even one-handed controls, which for a game that's all about its innovative twin stick steering mechanism is a pretty big deal. And a bunch of Nintendo exclusives and first parties doing nice things too. Kirby Air Riders, like I mentioned before, Metroid Prime 4, Pokemon Pokopia, Mario Tennis Fever. And vast amounts of indies and AA efforts too, from games like Starship Troopers Ultimate Bug War, Art of Flora, Angry Birds Play and Learn, Cairn, High on Life 2, Life is Strange Reunion. Rhythm fans have been eating well between Rhythm Doctor, Bits and Bops, and Agents of Groove. And more still like God of War, Sons of Sparta, Hermit and Pig, Chromagun 2, Fishbowl, Unseen Diplomacy 2, Absalom, Dungeon Gals, Adventure to Fate Dungeons. A very cool project called An Unplayable Game, which you will be hearing more about this afternoon. And tons more, again, some of which are in the doc at the end. Lots and lots of post-launch incremental upgrades too, covering everything from Plants vs. Zombies new game speed setting to Pivot of Hearts blind accessibility update, from Crimson Desert's text size settings all the way through to Avowed's custom game modes. And many more in games like Ghost of Yotai, Chronos New Dawn, Retro Rapid, Dimensional Double Shift, Constance, Claire Obscure, Wuthering Waves, Abiotic Factor, Slay the Spire 2, Black Ops 7, Keeper, 2XKO, World of Warcraft, and, of course, as always, Sea of Thieves. And there has also been a sudden rash of mods to make a wide range of mainstream games from Hades 2 to Final Fantasy fully blind accessible. And these mods all have something in common. They're all made by players and all using tools like Melon Loader in conjunction with Claude. This is a very interesting development with a whole bunch of caveats and implications, which we'll be hearing about directly from the blind people who've been making them in the panel after lunch today. And ever more developers taking the opportunity of remakes, remasters, and ports to upgrade accessibility so they can continue to reach OG players who are now older with different capabilities, and also be able to reach new audiences too. Games like Dragon Quest VII Reimagined, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Super Mario Galaxy 1+2, Tales of Xillia Remastered, Tales of Berseria Remastered, and Rayman 30th Anniversary Edition. So that brings me on to the final topic, the people who make it all happen. The redundancies across the industry have continued apace, meaning we've continued to lose allies. And we've actually had a retiree too. Brandon Zahand, who has been a stalwart of game accessibility for decades, is hanging up his hat and moving on to new pastures outside of game dev and accessibility. If you're not familiar with his work and the impact he's had, there's a link to his announcement in the document. And if you look at all the replies to his announcement, that will start to give you a taste. But in terms of dedicated full-time specialists, we've been at least a little bit sheltered from the wider industry picture. We have lost some, but the overall numbers are still staying relatively stable. So bearing in mind that we've lost some, for the numbers staying stable to be true, that means we have people in new, dedicated, full-time game accessibility positions to welcome to the field. We have Alex Dobre, Accessibility Specialist at EA, and Belly Alvarez, Accessibility Manager, also at EA. The third person here is Olivia Romanovich. She actually wasn't hired into a full-time role. She was taken on by Manycats as an intern. And as well as the Manycats internship, Alex Dobre at EA is a junior, meaning over the past 6 months, 2/3 of the new positions have been entry level. This is awesome to see, and actually also a really good indicator of the field maturing. And EA have another new starter too. Ollie Baker. Morgan Baker, EA's Accessibility Director, is now back from maternity leave after welcoming another accessibility champ into the world. And while we are on the positive vibes, I have one last thing to wrap up with. So this is a game from a Canadian studio called Capybara Games. Two of the developers there, John and Vic, were given an opportunity to work on a passion project. And they had some common ground between them of both having children who use AAC, which means alternative and augmentative communication aids. So communication tools used by people who have difficulty communicating verbally. So they decided to build a game around their shared experiences in the form of a cozy game about making friends at summer camp. You can see two different forms of AAC here. So there's the eye gaze grid used by the NPC girl in the wheelchair on the left, and also the symbol binder on the right, which is used by you as the player. It's a really beautiful piece of work. The game is called Find Your Words. It has just been released on Steam and it is totally free, although they offer a supporter pack too. So on that lovely note, all that's left for me now is to finally share that link dump document, which contains everything from this talk, plus some more things too. You can find that at tinyurl.com GAconf APR26, so tinyurl.com/GAconf APR26. I hope the talks, the discussions on Discord, and the connections you make are both insightful and energizing. And I'll be back again in another 6 months' time with another update. Thanks for watching. See you next time.